Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Kim Seabrooks, and this is the Kimberly Kristen Experience podcast. I'm so happy to have with me today Mr. Abdul Kelly, who is the founder of Solving the Race Problem. Hello, Abdul. How are you?
Hey, how are you this morning? Good to see you, and thanks for having me on your show.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm so happy that you're here. You know what? I'm so excited because I want everybody to know about the wonderful things that you're doing. So, before we actually go into your business and the things that you do, tell us a little bit about your background and where you're from.
Okay, as you mentioned, thank you for having me on. I appreciate what you're doing in setting up and establishing with your platform. As you mentioned, my name is Abdul. I am originally from the Philadelphia area. About 5 years ago, started to pursue a career in education. So that brought me to the Washington, D.C. area, which I still currently reside. I noticed that there were quite a few issues surrounding not only contemporary education, but the socio-political dynamics around race. And since that's the case, that put me on a trajectory to start and establish something like solving the race problem. So within my background, there have always been experiences that have been issues that stemmed away from race or problems that I saw surrounding the race issue. So all of these little small nuanced things throughout my beginnings have all culminated to the overall effect of me starting and establishing something like solving the race problem. But I would say definitely from humble beginnings, and I had a lot of great people in my early in my background that have helped me and put me on the right path to set up and establish what I'm currently doing now.
Okay, great. So I do know that you are an educator, and
Yes.
that's part of what solving the race problem is as well. So how did you get into, because I'm always curious. I've never wanted to get into education until now. Now I want to educate people on how to live a happier and healthier life. So what brought you to education?
I would say that based on all of the most profound and impactful people who I've met throughout my life have been people who I've interacted with within the education sector. It just so happened that some of the most impactful people that have helped my life and, steered me the correct way outside of family has been within education. So I think that education, whether it's, secondary, middle level, collegiate level, the role of the educator having access to a person for multiple hours a day, a majority of the week, you have a large influence on that young mind or on that person. So if you're utilizing that opportunity in that space, you'll see that education and the interactions within education can be very fruitful as far as establishing relationships, building on relationships. So all of those things that I noticed and I saw the impact that it could have. That's what prompted me to get into it. And also for me, as far as a Black man trying to do my part within society, it would make the most sense that I give back to the very same people that have helped me get to where I am. I consider it to sort of be paying it forward by getting in an education. And it's commendable that you see the importance of that and that you see yourself attempting to do the same thing.
Yeah, yeah, awesome, awesome. You know, before we actually get into solving the race problem and what it is, you know what, since the last time we talked,
Mhm.
there's been a new addition to your family.
Yes.
So how is that going for you?
It's
And
going.
congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Uh, Miss Kim is mentioning that I've recently become a father. So
Yes.
I found that navigating the space of Black fatherhood has been something that has really solidified me in my overall purpose in life. So I found that it's a path that unfortunately, we don't have many positive, constructive outlines and examples of what it means to be a Black father.
Mm.
Black fatherhood is not generally put on the forefront or promoted or spoken about, or, having groups of people just being able to talk about it, talk about their experiences, talk about the highs and the lows, the glows and grows. So
Mhm.
what I'm attempting to do, just to at least take a step into it, the more I've gotten to solving the race problem, had more of a social media presence. Something that I'm attempting to do is at least have like a once a month, once biweekly discussion around Black fatherhood, because I think that that's very important. It's very crucial. And a lot of the conversations within the Black community are centered around the female dynamic, the single mother. But I'm starting to see a large shift toward there's also a decent amount, a significant amount of Black fatherhood that happens to be single Black fathers. Not only that, but as we're building communities, having, Black families being built, the role of the Black father is very important. So I think at least having a space where people can talk about it, speak on it, share their experiences would only help the overall collective of inevitably building a Black family.
Awesome. Awesome. Now, speaking of the Black family, what was the moment that brought you to the conscious community, to the conscious movement?
I would say the defining moment I would say it's a lot of small moments that led up to the moment. And shout out to my mom. My mom is the smartest person who I've ever met.
Yes, definitely, I'm sure.
Yeah, she would, at least growing up, touching back on the beginnings, she would have us listening to things like Public Enemy, Fight the Power. We would listen to KRS-One. We would listen to music that had a message in it. She would be very deliberate as far as the books that we read, the books that we were exposed to. She was very deliberate in these things. And even though at the time I probably thought it was boring or I didn't really understand it, as a young man, I was going through a time where I would, just always be angry and not understand things, getting suspended from school, going through these experiences when in her seeing that and understanding the dynamics of how things work, she pushed me toward reading, learning, education, thinking your way through your situations. So, early beginnings, I had a lot of that. I had a lot of strong, impactful Black male educators, Black male principals. Shout out to all of them that have helped me, and I still keep in touch with a lot of them. So they have built the steps, building my foundation. But I would say once I got to college, college is when I really started to step into the realm fully, because one of the most defining experiences I had a white roommate and I went to a predominantly white university or institution. I started calling them historically white institutions. We say HBCUs, HWIs, historically white institutions that I unfortunately found myself in. But the good thing is, through that experience, I had a white roommate. He was from Western Pennsylvania, real small right-wing conservative. Trump County was where he was from, and that happened to be my roommate. So we would have conversations, and it would mostly always get political and turn into dynamics of speaking on race. And he would speak on the welfare state and say certain things to disparage Black people. And unfortunately, at the time, I didn't have the knowledge, the intellect, the educational backing to deal with those type of things. And I said, I'm not going to allow him to say these things and I don't have an intelligent rebuttal. So I went down a path of reading more, started reading more Marimba Ani, started reading more Dr. Amos Wilson, started reading more John Henrik Clark, Dr. Ben, and, Neely Fuller, Francis Cress Welsing. Shout out to all of those elders, Runoko Rashidi, every, scholar who you can think of, the pantheon of Black scholars, Chancellor Williams, Franz Fanon, I could keep, naming names, but all of them, I started to read their work. I started to check out their videos on YouTube, started to hear their perspective. And then, the rest was history. And I've been on this path ever since.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So now, solving the race problem. I mean, there's a lot in that title alone. So tell the audience what solving the race problem is.
Solving the race problem is essentially, if you just had to get a simple explanation, it's an educational consultant, and I'm an educational consultant. So it's an educational consulting business in which I do workshops centered around solving the race problem. Now, the name itself, solving the race problem, is very deliberate because I focus on solution-based conversations centered on literally solving the race problem. First question is, why would you want to solve that? Based on my observations, based on empirical data, based on everything that I've come across, I've come to the conclusion that race is a primary factor in all other major world problems. What I mean by that is if you look toward the economic disparity in the Black community, there's a racial component. If you look toward the entertainment industry, there's a racial component. The prison industrial complex, the housing with mass incarceration, the labor market, the condition that's in, the healthcare system, the condition that that's in. Like every area that we look to, every area of people activity, you will notice that there's a racial component. And I've noticed that that is the race problem. The race problem is the elephant in the room. We sometimes refer to it as white racism. We sometimes refer to it as systematic oppression or white supremacy. Whatever name you want to attach it, we're talking about the same big problem, the same elephant in the room. And what I've sought out to do is to solve that problem, solve the race problem, which is essentially saying that, hey, we all notice that there is a big problem here. Now, I would ask many people, although people might disagree with how I say we should go about doing it, but we can all at least agree that there is a problem that we want to solve. If we agree that there's a problem that we want to solve, let's go about doing it. Now, into the instruction of what I say, I make it very clear that you don't have to agree, nor do we don't have to agree on the methodology of how to solve the race problem. What we do need to agree on is that, hey, do we want to see Black society progress? Do we want to see Black society in a better condition than it is now? Do you agree with the tenets of Black empowerment? If your answer is yes to any of those questions, then you fall right in line with solving the race problem. So the name, the title, what I do, all of these things are very deliberate. And that's sort of the foundation and the groundwork of what solving the race problem is.
Awesome. That's great. That's great. You know, I wanted to ask you, when you decided to put this program together, is it because, excuse me, I'm sorry. Is it because there are other programs out there that are inferior to your program, or you just wanted to add to whatever else is out there?
I'll tell you, there are quite a few programs out there that through my undergrad at college and university, through my graduate program, they would have people who do similar work come to the college campuses and they would do workshops. And I've noticed that through all of them, one specifically, there was one called Courageous Conversations. It was a workshop centered on cultural competency, the same things I'm doing. It was called Courageous Conversation. So I'm sitting there listening to this, and mind you, this is a courageous conversation. So, you know, you sit through the entire thing, probably about 3-4 hours, you know, worth of stuff. Systematic racism isn't mentioned one time. Systematic oppression isn't mentioned one time. White racism isn't mentioned at all. It's more that Black accountability, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, racial conversation in a room full of all white people. Wow. And what I say is those types of conversations are very disingenuous. Those types of conversations are very dishonest because they don't accurately represent or they don't accurately depict what the problem is. Something that Dr. Amos Wilson would always say that stuck with me. He said, if you want to understand any problem in America, focus on who benefits from that problem, not who suffers from that problem. He would say, if you want to understand any problem in America, focus on who benefits from that problem and not who suffers from it. So what does that mean? If we use that and look at Courageous Conversations as an example, you would see we're focusing in on who suffers from the problem as opposed to who benefits from it. Because if we focus on who benefits from the problem, which is a large majority of white society, and we focus on who benefits from these problems, and you're saying this and you're presenting it to a room full of all white people, they're going to start to get uncomfortable. And if you're having a so-called courageous conversation, it stops when white people get uncomfortable. So it's not courageous at all. So what I've noticed is that's one program, but I've seen plenty of programs. I've seen plenty of examples. And at first, I did try to align myself with ones that would at least deal with the systematic component. Because I'll give another quote. Francis Cress Welsing would always say, if you don't have the courage to speak about, hold on, let me clean that up. Okay. She would say, if you don't have the courage to do anything about racism, at least have the courage to speak up about it. You said, if you don't have the courage to do something, fine, at least talk about it.
Yeah.
So if we can at least talk about it and we put that on the table to talk about it, I looked for groups that at least talked about it. And what I found, many of them were draped in assimilation. Many of them were draped in that Black accountability type of conversation. And through all of that, I noticed that I don't see the thing that I'm trying to align myself with. So let me create it myself. And then that put me on that path of solving a race problem. And I'm glad I did it, because I think that my message would have been compromised had I aligned myself with a popular group that does this type of work. Many of them, ironically, go to white society to get a conversation on it, like people like Tim Wise, who does this, Peggy McIntosh, Farrah Winfrey. There's a lot of white people that speak on this and do it, but they don't have a genuine, honest conversation that centers on Black empowerment, and that's my main thing from the beginning. So I know it was a little bit long-winded, but I hope I thoroughly answered your question.
No, you're good, because it when you're talking about the other programs, especially when you're talking about people who are Black, who are doing this a similar thing, to me, it's still steeped in wanting to be accepted. You're still wanting to be accepted. That's why you're walking on eggshells and you're tiptoeing around it. And then when you're talking about the Tim Wise and the other people, it's like all of that. If you're talking about Black empowerment, that is challenging their white privilege. So it's like, it's you have to have people like you who are really going to get knee deep and try to solve this problem. You're not trying to be accepted by white people. You're trying to empower us. And the thing is, they don't want us to really understand that white privilege is where they are. And even if you weren't someone who was around during slavery time, you're still benefiting from white privilege. So things like this is challenging that. So I commend you and congratulate you, because we need people like you out here fighting the fight like this. We all need to be fighting it, because no, go ahead.
I was going to say, I agree with you 1,000%. And it has been emphatically proven that those that descended from the beneficiaries of antebellum slavery are still continuing to benefit today. Yeah. So even that narrative of, my grandparents didn't do anything, or I didn't take part in that, but you're still a part of the group of the people that is continuing to benefit from it. Absolutely. Exactly. And Black empowerment is diametrically opposed to what a white person who speaks on racial theory presents, because it would literally be, if they're talking about how to empower you, I think of the analogy of, would a warden ever give the prisoners the escape plan? Like, here's a plan to escape this prison. Like, you can't expect in this power relationship, you would never expect a warden to give you the plan on how to escape. The same dynamic holds true. You can't go to a Tim Wise or a Jane Elliott to tell you, how to be Black empowered. They have no skin in the game. Now, coming from a perspective of me, what I deal with, I'm not attempting to make white people happy. In fact, when I do a lot of my presentations, I do anonymous, reviews and anonymous, what's the word I'm thinking of? I just got stuck there, but like a review, anonymous survey that they can do afterwards, an evaluation. And most of the time, they'll just say that, you're a racist, or you're speaking out racist talking points. And again, that shows that they didn't listen to anything, because, racist, it's a system dynamic that I wouldn't be able to function as a racist way. So even, bare minimum that once they hear truth that opposes their societal privilege and they get uncomfortable, then conversations stop. But unfortunately, what I found to be very effective is embedding in white people who also agree. So then they say, okay, look, maybe you disagree with me. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. But do these, these other white people who say the same thing, do they know what they're talking about? And, not to disrupt anybody in your audience, but to take it a step further. I've taken it a step further, and I take the position that all white people are racist until proven otherwise. And, I don't want to hurt any feelings by saying that, but the reason why I've come to that conclusion is because I look at, and I break this down within my workshops, I look at it as an entire spectrum. So if we're looking at the system of racism, white racism, as an entire spectrum, and you have on one end, you have your overt racist which is your white extremists, your white nationalists,
Mm-hmm.
ones that promote the white ethno state, the ones who would be open and honest in your face. Not only your hillbilly in West Virginia that'll call you the N-word, but also your political pundit who would advocate having the Confederate statue still in place. So it goes from your suit and tie to your hillbilly, but that is your overt white supremacist. And on the other end, you have your covert, which is your more liberal white supremacist, somebody who might even say that they have black friends, quote unquote, one that even might be sexually involved with a black person. So on all end of the spectrum, you have most of white society that'll fall somewhere within that spectrum. If you want a contemporary look as to how that makes sense, your overt would be Trump, your covert end would be Clinton, just so you have a dynamic of how to look at it. But the fundamental understanding for black people is that they both play for the same team. They both have a shared interest that is opposed to you and everything that you represent. So that's kind of what I lay out to at least get black people to think about these dynamics much differently than we have been thinking about them before, because they all benefit from it in some way. And that kind of caters to the point that you were just making.
Yeah. I mean, racism is a system. We've grown up in it and they have. So it's like, it's what you know. We've grown up in the system of racism, and so have they. So it's like, until you learn better, until you know better, then yeah, you're a racist. And I mean that it's because of how you were raised. I mean, and you can't get offended by that. It's just the way it is.
And I always use a simple baseline. Is what I'm saying true or false?
Yeah.
Real simple baseline. Is what I'm saying true or is it false? And then if you're going to follow me and walk down that path to say, yes, it is true, here's proof. Because I always come to validate and back up what I'm saying. One piece of evidence to prove what I'm saying. The Kerner Commission, put in place by Lyndon Baines Johnson, 1968. What is the Kerner Commission? The Kerner Commission basically states that, let me give you some context. Lyndon Baines Johnson was very upset about what was going on in America at the time, early 1960s. So you had this black empowerment wave. You had Marcus Garvey. You had Noble Drew Ali. You had the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. You had Malcolm X. You had Martin Luther King. You had this wave of black empowerment really crashing down and disrupting the American system. So what Lyndon Baines Johnson decided to do is, let's get an FBI directive together. Everybody sit down. Let's get a coalition and figure out, why are these problems happening? Very important. This is a root cause analysis FBI report that basically says, we're going to get to the bottom of this. Why are we having all of these problems in contemporary society? Do you know what they found out? That white racism is at the root of all societal issues. This is an FBI report that you can go look up for yourself. It is called the Kerner Commission. The National Action, the National Advisory Council. The Kerner Commission states specifically that white racism is at the root of all societal issues. And one other piece of proof, the Moynihan report. The Moynihan report, put forth by Daniel Patrick Moynihan, another root cause analysis report. They go in, FBI directive, and they decided that why are we having these issues in the black community in the 70s and 80s? They looked at it and saw that the root cause of it was single motherhood. So then it takes it a step further. Okay, if single motherhood is the problem in the black community, which they said it was, and we hear that narrative that the communities are the way they are because of single mothers, connected back to the beginning. That's why I speak on black fatherhood, building a black family is very important. But let's stick on that point. That let's say that, that they say it's a black single mother. So a report takes it a step further and says the reason why you even have the dynamic of the single black mother is because of the residual effects of Jim Crow, segregation, and economic deprivation in the black community. So even then, it ties right back into white racism. Francis Cress Welsing would always say, all roads lead to racism. So if you look hard enough, all roads lead right back to racism. And then my last piece of research I'll give you, because it's better when I can show it and give you everything. But I'm at least giving your audience points that they can go look up and reference. Last point, when I'm having these types of conversations, I find that people will say, well, let's say, for example, that it comes off and they say that I don't know what I'm talking about. Cool. I'm humble enough to say, you know what? Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, but is Dr. Martin Luther King qualified to speak on contemporary racial issues? Yeah. Martin Luther King. Yeah, he's qualified. Okay, let's go with Martin Luther King because they fed Black society a narrative that Martin Luther King was much different person than he actually was. They'll feed you a narrative that he was just about having a dream and that he was somehow a sellout or any of these things are not true at all. That's why I advocate that Black people go look up the scholars and look up these Black warrior scholars, these Black intellectual scholars, look up their work for themselves. You can look up a book by Dr. Martin Luther King. It's called Where Do We Go From Here? The PDF is available online for free. You can just go look it up. Where do we go from here? Martin Luther King, he does an entire chapter, it's right on page 68. He does an entire chapter on white racism, where he too says that all of the problems in society are based on white racism. He says if you want to understand a Black man's problem, look at the white man's problem. It has nothing to do with pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. It has everything to do with white imperialism, white domination, white racism. Martin Luther King says this, and I show it, and I put it right on the screen. That yeah, maybe cool. I don't know what I'm talking about, but is Martin Luther King qualified? And he is. And Martin Luther King has come to the same conclusions I did. The FBI report, the Kerner Commission, the Daniel Patrick Moynihan report. All of these people are validating and saying the very same thing that I'm saying. So when you present all of these, you'll find out that white people experience cognitive dissonance. They experience, well, yeah, that might be, but I don't believe in any of that stuff today. And then that's when, you got to go through a process of readjusting them. But I find coming in with proof, unfortunately, we're at a point where we got to prove racism. But I say, okay, that's the battle you want me to prove. I'll prove it to you. And then here's all the facts. Here's the research to back up what I'm saying.
Yeah. People don't understand that racism is really about money and power, and they're able to exclude and segregate. That's what they're able to do with all of that, because they have more money and power than us. So they're able to keep us out of things. They're able to, just exclude us from a lot of stuff because of the money and power. So,
and that's deliberate.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
very much
deliberate.
so. Very much so. So your program, Solving the Race Problem, if someone wanted to get involved in it, how would they go about doing that? And just tell us a little bit about the program and who's eligible for it as well.
Generally, if you want to get involved or find out a little bit more about what I do or specifics on each workshop, as of right now, I offer about six different workshops, and you can go to www.solvingtheraceproblem.org. Again, that's solvingtheraceproblem.org. You can go and see the explanation of the different workshops that I'll offer. I primarily work with educational institutions, colleges, nonprofit organizations. Generally, that's who I work with. I've also worked with some community organizations, some after-school programs. I've worked with them as well, and I'll do those as well. I don't have a problem with doing those, but my primary focus is generally within the education sector, because that's where that's the area that I would say that I have the most knowledge and background on. So I generally focus in that area. I wouldn't be opposed to doing it in another area if somebody reached out and said that they have a different lens or a different group, a church group, a community group, your sorority, your fraternity, whatever it may be. I wouldn't have any issues doing it with those. But primarily, I work within the education sector. So that's who's eligible. Now, as far as just hearing my perspectives and hearing my ideas on a wide variety of things, even if you weren't interested in the workshops, I have started to have a little bit more of a social media presence. I know last time we spoke, I was kind of behind on that. So I do have I have a YouTube page that is active and running. I put content on there pretty frequently. You can go to, when you go to YouTube, just go to Solving the Race Problem on YouTube and check me out on there. I do put out content pretty frequently on my YouTube page that you'd be able to have, dialogue back and forth with me outside of what it would be offered in a workshop. But if you want it to be a little more formal, do a workshop, by all means, you should reach out to me. You can start by going to my website, solvingtheraceproblem.org, or you can email me at solvingtheraceproblem@gmail.com. Again, that's solvingtheraceproblem@gmail.com. But if you go to my website, all my contact info is on there as well.
Okay. Now, you're in the DC area,
Yes,
correct?
that's correct.
So if someone wanted to get involved, they would actually have to be in the DC area, or are you able to do it online right now?
I could do an online version. I actually just presented in South Carolina,
Okay.
in in South Carolina at a conference, a community impact assembly. I just
Okay.
presented there, so I don't have an issue with traveling and going to other places. It's been primarily on the East Coast so far, but I know you have listeners all over. So if somebody
Yeah.
contacts me from wherever you are, I wouldn't let space and time limit us, because
Okay.
we're at a point where the technological age has allowed us to speak and communicate, like me in my house, you in your house right now, and we still
Mm-hmm.
having an edifying conversation. So those same pillars and those same dynamics will hold true if somebody reaches out and they want a more in-depth look at solving the race problem. So if you reach out to me, we can certainly make that happen. We'll make it work.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. So since the last time we spoke, what's been going on with solving the race problem?
As far as solving the race problem, it's still been going, still been spreading, getting my message out.
Mm-hmm.
Having people get in contact with me, offering workshops and working with people. And
Mm-hmm.
I found that to make it a little more accessible, I said, I took your advice and got into social media, because
Yeah.
that has at least expanded my scope
Yeah.
and not made it to just speak on what I offer in a workshop, but then offer my opinions on other contemporary issues while still looking at it with the race lens, and speaking on things that might not necessarily tie into a workshop, but still
Yeah.
being able to speak on things. And YouTube has been one of those platforms. And, as I've increased my social media presence, so things like that have
Yeah.
really been my primary focus since the last time we spoke.
That's great. I'm so happy for you.
Thank
So,
you. Thank you.
so Abdul, again, it's been so nice having you here. This has been great. And before you go, I want you to just give some of our budding entrepreneurs some, advice, some words of wisdom, anything you want to say.
I would say for everyone listening, two African proverbs come to mind. One of them is, by the time the fool has learned the game, the players disperse.
Wow.
It's by the time the fool has learned the game, the players have dispersed. And
Yeah.
to me, that means that we are at a very crucial period in American history, in Black history, in the Black experience.
Mhm.
We're up against the clock, and we are in a dire time that we need to learn and understand what is going on if we want to change our condition. If
Yes.
we want Black empowerment to be achieved within our lifetime, we will take things like what I'm offering very serious. We will start to have more of a constructive outlook on the things that we need to produce, the things that we need to manifest. I'll
Mhm.
give you an analogy of what I consider to be the end goal, because to make all of this clear, solving a race problem, everything I speak on, everything that anybody who's Black and call themselves conscious, who speaks on anything, the end goal should be Black liberation.
Mhm.
That is the end goal that we are trying to get to. To make this clear and have this make sense to you, I'll deal with two analogies. I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but I'll circle it all back and have it all make sense. Two analogies I work with Black empowerment. One of them is, think about Black empowerment as building a house. What I mean by that is, if you're building a house, we're attempting to tear down an old house and replace it with a new house.
Mhm.
The old house that we are in, things are unjust, there's systematic oppression. There are things that we do not like about this old house. Now, does the whole entire house need to be torn down? Maybe not. Maybe there's some things in the old house that we can keep and still use. We
Mhm.
will need Black people who can focus on destroying the house.
Mhm.
That's a reality, that we do need a group of our people who are focused on destroying the house, dismantling, deconstructing.
Mhm.
We will also need a side of our people who can focus on building. If you're not a destroyer, that's okay. We have some people who are. If you're more of a builder, we need builders as well to build up this house. Now, as you're building a new house, you have people who are going to need to do the drywall, people who are going to need to install windows, people need to install plumbing. Some people work on roofing. All of these people have a different job, much different roles, but they are all working toward the collective of building the house.
Mm-hmm.
Within that analogy, that is how Black liberation works. So we all might have a different role within it, but we're all working toward the same collective. The roofer doesn't have to agree with the plumber.
Yeah.
But they need to be on the same page as far as building
Yeah.
this house. And I hope that analogy makes sense. The second one, long term, is thinking about Black liberation as a relay race, that we have to make sure we're doing everything in our power to hand the baton to the next generation if we want this thing to keep going, because it doesn't start and stop with us. There are hurdles in the way, like white racism, but we need to make sure we're doing our part to run the race. I'm going to loop it right back to the second African proverb that I'll end with. And that African proverb goes something along the lines of, just because you cover your eyes doesn't mean the sun disappears.
Mm-hmm.
Just because you cover your eyes doesn't mean the sun disappears. And I'll let that sit on your conscience as far as what that means. I'm sure you can piece it all together. And that's where I go with solving the race problem.
All right. Thank you so much. That was so great.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
You're so welcome. And I just want to let everybody know, thank you so much for joining us. If you want to be a guest on the Kimberly Kristen Experience podcast, you can go to kimseabrooks@gmail.com. You can connect with me on, and I have to look at my paper because I always get this wrong every time. You can connect with me on Instagram at Kimberly Seabrew. Facebook is Kimberly Seabrooks, and Twitter is at KK Seabrooks. All right, Abdul, thank you so much, and you have a wonderful day, and kiss that baby for me.
Oh, I definitely will. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate you having me on. I appreciate the opportunity, and thank you to your listening audience for listening. Again, you can contact me at Solving the Race Problem. You can reach me at solvingtheraceproblem.org. That's my website. You can find me on YouTube at Solving the Race Problem. You can contact me by email if you so choose, and that's solvingtheraceproblem@gmail.com. But again, thanks to your listening audience. I appreciate the opportunity, and hopefully we'll get a chance to speak again soon.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Definitely. All right.
All right. Thank you.
Take care. You're welcome. Bye-bye.